Hello, I'm Waqar Rizvi, and this is Scope. Thank you for joining us for today's episode. Suspicious doesn't begin to describe the incident in the Gulf of Oman. That's according to Iran's Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif. Now, the United States has pointed the finger for those two oil tankers that have exploded in some cases. That's according to some of the crew members, at least, in the Gulf of Oman. What does this mean going forward? Because this has happened previously too, hasn't it? On May the 12th or May 13th, early May 13th, in the port of Fujairah in the United Arab Emirates, 4 oil tankers were also attacked. And at that time as well, the United States immediately blamed the Islamic Republic of Iran. This time around, though, is a tad bit different because Iran itself is the one that technically broke the news of the fact that these oil tankers had been attacked to begin with, or that these ships had been attacked to begin with in international waterways. And in fact, even one of the crew of one of these ships was saved by Iran. On the other side, of course, we have the U.S. and others saying that Iran is trying to send a message, essentially, to the region and the world under these tight sanctions, which it is, that it can make life very hard in international waterways as well. To discuss all of this a bit further, we're joined now by Sadeqi, who is a PhD candidate in American Studies at the University of Tehran. She's joining us now from Tehran. Joining us now from Dubai is Rasha Aljoundi, who is a senior researcher at the Orient Research Center. Rasha and Setareh, thank you both for joining us. Rasha, I'd like to start with you. What do you make of yesterday's incident in the Gulf of Oman?
I believe that the message that Iran wanted to send to the region and to the U.S. Is that it rejected the Japanese mediation. Though I don't think Prime Minister Abe suggested or said anything about the specifics and terms regarding any possible meeting between Trump and Rouhani or the Supreme Leader. I believe the IRGC, especially the IRGC, don't want to open any new talks because they on new nuclear deal, like the Trump administration wants, because it will include other files regarding the expansion agenda of Iran in the region, its proxies that threaten its neighborhood. And the missile program. So Iran knows that the nuke talks will touch on these issues, and they don't want it. And I want to emphasize that the Gulf countries and the U.S. don't want war, didn't want any new escalation before these attacks. And you probably remember that when the attacks near the port of Fujairah happened, the UAE opened an independent investigation with other countries participating in, and the U.S. Actually said that it's probably Iran. They didn't say at that time that it is Iran. Now they are saying that it is Iran because Secretary Pompeo said that the U.S. have.
But interesting on that point you made there, Rasha, because that report that you referred to, and I'm glad you did, because that report did not, in fact, specifically name Iran at all, right?
Yeah, it's true. It's because they don't want any new escalation. Nobody wants, because if they say actually that it's Iran, they will be escalating, and they need to do like something about it. It will be very dangerous for the reason. If in fact the investigation actually said that it's Iran.
Right.
But the U.S. said that it's there's like a actual indication that it's Iran, because nobody have any interest or any capability to do this on the maritime.
Okay, so Rasha, I'm going to interrupt you because I actually want to play the part about Mike Pompeo, the U.S. Secretary of State, blaming Iran. I want to play that very quickly, that clip, and then I want to go to Setareh and get her reaction from that. Let's watch that clip first.
Is the assessment of the United States government that the Islamic Republic of Iran is responsible for the attacks that occurred in the Gulf of Oman today. This assessment is based on intelligence, the weapons used, the level of expertise needed to execute the operation, recent similar Iranian attacks on shipping, and the fact that no proxy group operating in the area has the resources and proficiency to act with such a high degree of sophistication. Taken as a whole, these unprovoked attacks present a clear threat to international peace and security, a blatant assault on the freedom of navigation, and an unacceptable campaign of escalating tension by Iran.
All right, so Setareh, you've heard there from Mike Pompeo himself, and then as Rasha was saying, the regional countries such as the UAE and others do not want an escalation. How do you react to all of that?
Well, Pompeo started blaming Iran only a few hours after the incident, and it's funny how the U.S. has always claimed that they have evidence for example, weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and they've spent billions of dollars and taken lives of so many innocent citizens. And after so many years, they come out and say, no, there was no such a thing in Iraq, for example. This is just another case. In a few hours, how can the U.S. Assess, based on their intelligence, that it is Iran? I think so far it is not clear who has done this, but I don't see that how that would be of interest to Iran, because Iran has already sent its message to the world that if the U.S. and other European countries impose sanctions on Iran's oil exports, Iran would close down the Strait of Hormuz. So there is no need to send another message. The message is very clear. On the other hand, this happened while Prime Minister Abe was in Iran talking to President Rouhani and the supreme leader of Iran as a mediator. And so it seems that there are intentions to violate or to halt any friendly discussions or friendly dialogues between Iran and any of other nations.
To be fair, Setareh, if you said that Iran has already sent a message by saying that it can close international waterways, especially which oil supplies go through, such as the Strait of Hormuz or others. Wouldn't this then be, if we were to believe the allegations, wouldn't this then be Iran actually following through on that threat?
Well, I don't think that would be a step Iran would take, because Iran is already under very severe sanctions on its oil exports, and that wouldn't really help Iran in any way. So I don't believe that would be a step Iran would take, especially during, while the Japanese prime minister is in Iran, and the message is already clearly being sent that Iran is neither ready to hold dialogue or negotiations with the U.S., nor to withdraw from the stances it has taken previously. So, I don't think that would be a step Iran would take, because Iran has been taking into account its own interest.
Go to Rasha then. Rasha, let's talk about then what Iran's interest would be, in your opinion. Do you think it would be smart for Iran to try to start an escalation at this time, especially considering the country is under severe sanctions right now, some of the severest it's ever been under? And secondly, I wanted to add this on, Rasha, where you mentioned earlier that the UAE, for example, or other countries in that report, such as Saudi Arabia or Norway, don't want this situation to escalate, and that is why they did not blame Iran. But can we not also argue that maybe the evidence simply right now, at least, is not strong enough to blame Iran?
Well, thank you for this question. Actually, I think it's because of the sanction and that Iran never faced before. Iran have an interest to escalate, because Iran wants others to suffer and lose, because Iran is losing on the internal level and on the on foreign relation level. Iran have a lot of internal dissatisfaction because of the economy. Everybody is blaming Rouhani for the situation now happening. They are saying that he lied about what he promised before, and actually the corruption is not saving or helping in propping up this regime. So Iran have an interest to escalate on the foreign relation level and on the region, because because it will make people inside Iran just gather around the regime because it's a national interest issue. And when Iran do this escalation and emphasize on it, it's making Trump be weak. If Trump actually do something about it, when it's he's saying that the foreign minister Pompeo saying that the U.S. have evidence about it, because the CENTCOM video indicates that there's a small Iranian boat sailing up to the and removing an exploded mine. This is an evidence. It's different than Iraq war, where they said that it's intelligence and another details that I don't want to.
But then, if I may, for a moment, Rasha, because sure, we can talk about what the U.S. has said and et cetera about Iran, and how it has presented evidence or alleged evidence, at least it's has to be verified and all of the above, as you well know the process. Do you think that there would be a third party, Rasha, such as possibly we can talk about Israel or even the United States itself, that may actually benefit if there is escalation in the region between regional countries? Certainly, that would be a good thing, wouldn't it? Because it would just be another war where more military arms, et cetera, would flow into the region?
Well, I certainly think that it's not on the U.S., especially Trump administration, interest to have another war in the Middle East. They are because if you think about it, if Trump actually did another Iraq war, he would be losing the 2020 election probably, because nobody in the U.S., like on the national level, on the people's level, wants any war like Iraq. Nobody actually backing this, and I don't think that the U.S. would do it, except, for example, if the Iran actually hit some U.S. direct interests. The Iraq war is still on the U.S. mind, and it was a very bad experience and bad decision, actually. So I think if Trump administration would do something about it, and I think they should, because otherwise Iran will harm the Trump administration image. And they actually have an interest for Trump to lose the 2020 election, and they will go back to the nuclear deal, which no Iranian missiles file would be discussed, and no expansion agenda, and nothing, no proxies, and the economic.
Okay, so if you allow me, Rasha, I wanted to take the points that you've just made, allow me to and give it to Setareh to respond to. Setareh, do you believe that there is a third party that would benefit from a standoff or an escalation or even violence between Iran and regional countries and or other global powers? And who do you think that would be?
Of course, I cannot predict, but there is evidence that the security dilemma has always been one thing that the U.S. has pursued in the Middle East, because that causes a lot of willingness to buy weapons from the U.S. And this is nothing new. There is a lot of evidence, and there is a historic record for that. And that I mentioned the case of Iraq, it was an example of the so many allegations of the U.S. against not only Iran, but also other regional countries.
I wanted to ask you as well, Setareh, about the oil factor in all of this. How do you think that plays out into this?
It could play in the way that it diverts the attention of the entire region and the world or away from the Palestinian cause, as well as the Golan Heights and the issue that is concerned with that region. And if you remember, also for allegations of the U.S. Against Iran that said there are threats coming from Iran and or the IRGC against U.S. positions in Iraq, they said that it was intelligence collected by Mossad, the Israeli intelligence agency, but they never provided any evidence on that. So I cannot, I mean, the Mossad, the Israeli intelligence services have always been working for the U.S. They have been training MEK in many cases and also in assassinating the Iranian nuclear scientists. Also, I would like to briefly mention that it would be very naive to say that Iran would benefit from escalation or tension in the region because of its internal problems. That means that you don't really know about Iran's internal affairs, because that is something that the Iranian nation at this time would never, ever accept. They do not want any tension with any region, because the economy is already doing not very good.
Okay, Setareh, well, I do apologize for interrupting you. We'll have to leave it there at that, but I'm glad that that final point that we're leaving it on with the both of you. We will, of course, try to have you both back on to continue this important conversation and get your insight in that regard as well. But we'll say thank you to Setareh and Rasha. Do stay with us, viewers. We're going to continue this conversation with two new voices coming up. Welcome back, viewers. We're still talking about this Gulf of Oman attack, and in this segment, we're going to be discussing with Antonio Scaramella, who is a geopolitical analyst. He's joining us now from Rome in Italy, and we're also joined by Shayan Arkian, who is a political analyst on Iranian affairs. He is also the chief editor of the specialist magazine Iran Anders. He's joining us now from Berlin. Shayan and Antonio, thank you both for joining us. Antonio, I'd like to start with you. What do you make of what happened in the Gulf of Oman? Who do you think is actually behind those attacks?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, of course. And what I would say is Iran seems like too much of an easy target for this to happen. They had no real interest or convenience in creating such a mess near to the Strait of Hormuz, which is one of their greatest geopolitical assets. They don't want too much trouble in there. Of course, they might have wanted to send a signal to the U.S. to say, okay, we are in control of this place. This is our strait, and we can do whatever we want with it. This, of course, is also shown by the fact that among the Americans, the Iranians were the first ones to arrive on the spot to provide rescue for the people on the ships.
Yeah.
What I would say is, who is behind this? We should think first who gains from this. U.S. for sure gains from it, because he can use it as a moral high point against Iran to try to create a more, let's say, aggressive diplomatic environment towards Iran, which, apart from the strategic regional alliance of the U.S., the other allies of the United States, like the European states, for example, they are not so keen on following Trump's lead on what is happening in Iran. So maybe this could have been a way to muster a little bit more support for his very strong policy towards Iran.
Okay, so if I may, let me, if you allow me, Antonio, those points you made, I want to bring in Shayan, because Shayan, you're sitting in Berlin as well. I wanted to get your thoughts about what, for example, people in Berlin and experts in Berlin are saying about the situation, because yes, as Antonio said, obviously Europe would be looking at this situation with a lot of alarm, because they wouldn't want any more instability in the Middle East, which would mean even more asylum seekers on European shores. But then who do you think is really behind this, if not Iran?
I think we cannot answer this question seriously from here. The much more important question is, what would happen if it was actually Iran? A war? I don't think so, because the U.S. does not have the ability to attack Iran. Trump does not want a war. He wants to be reelected, but a war against Iran would mean several thousand of dead American soldiers. The American ships in the Persian Gulf, in the Strait of Hormuz, and even in the Gulf of Oman are very easy targets for the immovable Iranian anti-ship missiles. The U.S. is always waging wars against states that cannot defend themselves, that are military weakened. See Iraq, Libya, Afghanistan, Serbia, even Vietnam and Korea. And Iran is definitely not one of them. So SATCOM announced yesterday that it has no interest in a military conflict with Iran. The Pentagon came to the conclusion in 2002 in a war simulation that the U.S. forces in the Persian Gulf will conventionally lose the war against Iran. And that was already in 2002 when the U.S. was much more powerful than it is today, and Iran was not as strong as it is today. The U.S. even couldn't defeat the Taliban, let alone Iran.
Well, if I may push you on that point, Shayan, because many people would say, listen, Iran is currently under one of the severest round of sanctions that it's ever been under. Do you not think that even though Iran has said, listen, it has threatened that we can, as in the Iranians, can close the Strait of Hormuz if they want to, as a message to the world, if there are further sanctions and further limits on its ability to export oil, couldn't this just be a sign that Iran is carrying through those threats?
If there's nothing left to lose, yes, so it's up to the international community. Let me say so. If the U.S. steps out of the nuclear agreement in violation of the international law and imposes unilateral sanction on the country in violation of international law again, then Iran also feels empowered to, at least questionable under international law, block the Strait of Hormuz. The spiral of escalation must be stopped, and this must be set at the origin, namely at the illegal exit of the USA from the nuclear deal.
Okay, so Antonio, what are your thoughts about this, Antonio? Because one of the images that we are playing as we're discussing is that image that the U.S. has released, saying that it proves an Iranian ship, a small Iranian boat, I should say, pardon me, was caught removing what seemed to be a mine. That is according to experts, at least. But obviously, the images are not very clear. It seems to be, a nighttime vision type a camera, which isn't very clear. The markings on the boat are not clear either, but that's at least what we're being told by the United States. Do you believe that that video is authentic, firstly, Antonio? And if it is, then what exactly and why exactly would Iran want to be attacking tankers in such quick succession? Because we just had these attacks on May 12th, and now we have these attacks yesterday as well.
Well, I will not speak about the authenticity of the video. Honestly, I don't have the means or instruments to actually say that. But again, Iran has no convenience whatsoever to carry on such actions. Closing the Strait of Hormuz could be an asset. Like our colleague said before, if yes, an asset is something they can use, but they will use it only if they're desperate. They're not desperate at this point. Creating such kind of tension would not work for them. But in general, going back to the question, Mike Pompeo, the U.S. Secretary, said that yes, probably the attack can be linked to Iran. This video was released, but actually he didn't show any hard proof to the journalists. He didn't take any questions. So I'm not that sure that they can rely on the video themselves too much. So even if it's true, if they don't call it or put it out as hard proof, I'm not ready to trust it. Again, also mostly because they have no convenience in doing it. Rouhani tried to come closer to the West with the Obama administration, and he's still sitting president. So, of course, we can also say that could be some members of the Revolutionary Guard under the orders of Khamenei attacking and showing this kind of power and showing this kind of strength to America, to Saudi Arabia, and to the world. But again, at this point, what they are trying to do, at least what they are showing to do, is try to keep this nuclear agreement in place, at least with those states willing to, and showing, imposing themselves like a rogue state, as America would like to depict them, sounds very strange. And just one small addition, since you're showing Shinzo Abe here in the pictures I'm seeing,
yes,
the timing is not really convincing. As we all know, Japan is one of the strongest allies of the United States, and well, I will not say too much of a coincidence that this kind of incident or attack happens at the time that Shinzo Abe is talking to Rouhani about keeping supplies up. So I wouldn't trust it.
Sure. Shayan, I wonder, it's been said, Shayan, that this is possibly members of the IRGC or somebody else within Iran who you would usually call the quote-unquote hardliners, who would want to send some sort of a very tough message to the world in some very substantive way. Do you think that it is possible that there are rogue elements within Iran who would want some sort of a confrontation?
No, I don't think so. Iran is a stable country. It is not like a country that is unstable and the actors in the state can act on itself. The role of the ILGC in the nuclear deal is overrated in Western media. And in fact, the ILGC was one of the first that praised the agreement and had previously issued the directive to its related media not to report too critically about the nuclear negotiation. It is right that Iran certainly will not negotiate from the position of weakness with the US, because this would mean a capitulation. So Iran has to start up its nuclear program step by step again in order to generate bargaining power and not necessarily to attack ships in the Persian Gulf. It's too early for such reactions and actions by Iran.
So do you think then, Shayan, that there's a lot of room here for a mistake to occur on either side, really, for somebody to overreact and for there to then be a full-blown war? Because it seems like this is quite a sensitive time, isn't it?
I think this is all of the mere sociological warfare measure to continue deterring business and investment in Iran. The U.S. will never dare to attack a regional power. Since the Second World War, and even this is disputed, the United States has not waged war against countries that is able to defend themselves. So I think, in essence, all this sociological warfare to deterring business and investment in Iran and to put more pressure on Iran to come so-called back to the negotiation table. But it was the U.S. that leaves the negotiation table and not Tehran.
Antonio, and that's a good point, in fact, right? Because as you mentioned, Antonio, Abe was in Iran. And in fact, the rumor is that right before coming to Iran, Abe had in fact spoken to Trump, and that Trump may have given him the green signal to mediate on behalf of the United States with Iran. And then, we had Trump tweeting then that, he thought it was too early then after these attacks occurred. Do you think that the U.S. is playing a double game of sorts then, Antonio, where it's trying to both pressure Iran and secondly try to also mediate with Iran? Because we've had Trump making some interesting statements, hasn't he, recently towards the Iranian leadership?
Yes, absolutely. I would agree with you. The Americans are playing on the same table, but with two different sets of cards. On the other, on one side, they are, of course, going for the hard pressure, which is one of the main characteristics of Trump's presidency and Trump's way of approaching geopolitics and diplomacy in general. So I would see that as absolutely possible. Also, in a way of keeping up with his electorate inside the United States. On the other side, we've also noticed in the style how the Trump presidency has been working out that the deep state still has a strong influence on how American policy is carried out, especially when we're talking about diplomacy and when we're talking about foreign policy. So I would say that since Iran is not likely to back down, the regime change is very, very difficult. At best, an invasion is not possible, even if might be on the table of some hawks in the White House. But I wouldn't think about that too much, because conquering Iran would be awfully complicated, also for the United States. But of course, in the end, the American needs to be the number one. Is the number one. So it will keep pushing until the Iran rebellion, let's say like that, will come to an end. How will really much depend, of course, on the position of the Iranians, how the Iranians will respond. But first, I would like to say that until Khamenei is in his place, he was raised and he grew as a politician and as a cleric in a very anti-American context. So pushing for, on the American side, of course, pushing for too hard policies and diplomacy towards them will not work, in my personal opinion. Approaching them On a diplomatic side, using Irani, which has been much more of a, I don't know, easy character, definitely, would be a much better option.
Okay, so Shayan, we just have a minute left. I want to give you the final word. Where do you think all of this will head, Shayan? Do you think this is the last such incident that we're seeing? Because it seems, at least, that things are escalating in the region. And then what if something a lot bigger happens next time? What does that mean then for the region?
Again, I don't think it will lead to the war. It will bring more pressure to Iran, but as your colleague also said, it will not bring to collapse in Iran, because as you know, Iran has huge experience in evading sanctions. Of course, the sanctions hurt, but it will not bring to collapse Iran.
But then, do you not think, Shayan, that there could be some country or even Israel or somebody or U.S. forces in the region that would react in some violent way to Iranian forces, Iranian boats?
What should be the aim of an U.S. attack? It can't destroy the nuclear site underground, even not with a bunker buster. A regime change through military force is an illusion. Unlike Iraq, Iran is mountainous and not flat, and it is specialist both in conventional and asymmetric warfare. It has not one army, it has two armies, the regular army and the Revolutionary Guards. Iran can't be swallowed before the next presidential election in U.S. Iranians are calculating that they could cause enough harm to Americans in a war which will force them end to the war. And because of all these facts, I don't think that the U.S. will attack Iran, because it does not make a sense.
Very well. We'll leave there as our final word. But Shayan and Antonio, we appreciate both your time, your insight, and of course, analysis. As all of our guests have spoken about, viewers, there are two sides to this. Of course, to me as well, it doesn't make sense why Iran would attack these oil tankers. But on the other side, as Rasha there said in the first segment of this discussion about this topic, was that Iran may be trying to send a message that it can attack in international waterways. Mind you, Iran has already threatened that it would close the Strait of Hormuz if its oil exports were in fact brought to zero or close to that. So is that what's happening? Or is it on the other side, as Iran is saying, suspicious activity? Why would Iran attack an oil tanker, that to a Japanese-flagged oil tanker, while Japan's prime minister was in the country apparently to mediate between Trump and the Iranian government? Does that make sense? Is that good policymaking? And remember, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Norway report did not name Iran. And that, of course, about the May 12th incident that took place in the port of Fujairah in the UAE. We'll keep a close eye on how this situation develops, certainly a very sensitive one here in Scope. I'll be back, though, after a short break with our next segment. Welcome back, viewers. Donald Trump has made a statement recently at the White House saying if somebody called from a country such as Norway, he used an example there, we have information on your opponent, oh, I think I'd want to hear it. Now, that's an interesting statement coming from Donald Trump, especially at a time that the Mueller report, or the Mueller investigation, I should say, has just wrapped up work, has released its report, redacted, of course, and not all the information has come out, but pretty much essentially absolving the Trump campaign of any collusion with Russia, but not, of course, absolving him of the more or less important charge, depending on how you look at it, of obstructing justice. Is Donald Trump saying that he would be open and that American presidents and American political candidates should be open to accepting information from foreign countries on their political opponents? And what does that then mean for American democracy and otherwise? Or is this just an overblown issue altogether? Let's discuss this a bit further. We're joined now by Benjamin Gannon, who is joining us now from Coventry in the UK. He is a teaching fellow in U.S. politics at the University of Warwick in the UK. We're joined as well by Tim Kirby, who is a political analyst for Strategic Culture, which is a think tank, and he is speaking to us now from the Russian capital, Moscow. Tim and Benjamin, thank you both for joining us. Benjamin, I wanted to start with you. How important is this, or do you think this is a bit overblown in the sense that Trump is essentially just saying, listen, this is all genuine when it comes to political campaigning. This is all fine.
I mean, I think the president definitely knew what he was doing, and I think he knew what he was saying. I think he may now try and spin this as this was just something that was said off the cuff in an interview. It was all a bit overblown. But I think definitely this is part of a deliberate attempt for President Trump to now play the outcome of the Mueller report, which you highlighted, which on the whole did fail to find any smoking gun that incriminated the president. So what he's looking to do now is probably make this kind of behavior that Mueller did identify, which was at times very close relations between Trump campaign staffers and foreign nationals, a perfectly legitimate activity. He wants to be able to say to his base, the kind of activity that we did by going out and having members speak to foreign nationals, that the Democrats did by hiring dossiers from people like Christopher Steele. This is all perfectly legitimate and acceptable behavior. It's not something we should worry about. We shouldn't consider it illegal. And that's part of the narrative he wants to do. He's going to try and have to legitimize this now. Does this mean he will accept info from foreign spies, which was kind of the takeaway that we took from this after the interview? On the one hand, well, in many ways, the United States kind of already does this in political campaigns. Lots of foreign governments look to gain their influence from campaigns. They reach out, they build relationships.
Exactly. And on that point, Benjamin, I wanted to Tim then. Tim, isn't Donald Trump, or hasn't Donald Trump just stated the obvious? As Benjamin there said, foreign governments obviously try to lobby different U.S. political candidates in their own way. And I imagine a lot of that lobbying goes along with giving dirt on their opponents.
Well, that seems very obvious to us sitting here right now, but that's not obvious to the masses in the United States, and the people who report this information in the mainstream media understand that. They don't really inform the public when they're talking about collusion or conversing with foreign governments that every political candidate from both parties for the post of President of the United States from within my lifetime has taken donations from some sort of foreign donors. So this is really some sort of selective outrage against Trump for doing something that everyone else does. Furthermore, if Trump were to actually have said on camera, yes, this is terrible, I would never take information from a foreign source. If he were to receive one email from Russia that they could find let's just call them his enemies, his detractors could find, then he'd be essentially, in the media sense, guilty of something. So it's best to just say, hey, everyone does this. It's no problem, no sweat. You've got nothing on me, because they don't.
So then, Benjamin, then this really follows with how concerning is this then, that foreign governments, that foreign donors have this much influence within U.S. politics? That certainly cannot be a good thing.
I wouldn't agree, perhaps, with quite the extent that this is absolutely par for the course. I mean, as I was saying before, it's certainly true that foreign governments will try and have as much influence as they can. They will reach out, they will try and build relationships, particularly when they identify figures who are likely to be important on another campaign. But that by no means is the same as saying that you will openly take intelligence from a foreign government. Bear in mind, this could be information that could be attained by wiretaps. He's saying it could be attained by running spies within the United States. It could be attained perhaps even by taking informants within the U.S. government. And that in and of itself is something that the American public would not tolerate, the U.S. institutions themselves would not tolerate. And that really hasn't been seen anywhere near to the same extent as Trump is trying to legitimize here. And I think in many ways, by trying to legitimize this does create a genuine problem. And we've seen that even in the reaction from within the Republican Party. They've been very quick to distance themselves from some of these claims and saying, actually, no, this isn't okay. The FEC, the Federal Election Commission, has come out and saying this is not acceptable. This would be seen as illegal. And now the problem is going to be trying to make sense in the light of the Mueller report, exactly what do we distinguish between illegal behavior, what is no longer acceptable, and what is acceptable influence, what is acceptable outreach.
Benjamin, I'm going to put a point to you, Benjamin, which I'm sure you've heard before, said by a lot of us who are outside of the U.S. looking at this, with a smile on our face, because one could argue, Benjamin, that the U.S. has interfered in many elections around the world. Isn't it then sort of interesting that the U.S. would then be concerned at any level, really, about any sort of interference in its elections?
Oh, absolutely. And as we absolutely know, the U.S. is the biggest influencer of other elections. And this is something they'll both do very, very openly, and they'll be happy to kind of have on the record as something that they try and do. But at the same time, we know that they do a lot of stuff behind the scenes to try and influence other elections. They're the biggest and most successful practitioner of this by far. but at the same time, they don't want this happening domestically. That's not something that they would find a hypocritical stance to take, because as far as they're concerned, the difference is that even though they're being offered it, they shouldn't take it. I think for Trump, there are two sides for this. I think the international side, the side for us looking outside of this, is that he's very much saying to the world, look, I do conduct the foreign relations of the United States differently to other presidents. I'm all about transactions. What can you give us as a foreign government in exchange for our favor? It's not about building these relationships over time anymore. It's now about, hey, if you can give me something, if you can give me some dossier, some information about another candidate, maybe perhaps we will start to look more favorably on you the next time we revisit our trade or our security relations. And he's trying to signal to the rest of the world that that's what he wants to do.
Okay, Tim, if you allow me, I want to go to Tim. Tim, does this mean in some way, and I don't want to overstate this, but does this mean in some way that American democracy is really up for sale?
Well, we have to, again, look to the recent past and even the distant past that during every election cycle, there's always accusations that dead people have been voting, there's gerrymandering, certain districts within the United States don't have very good, very long open hours for voting. There's always very large problems within the entire electoral process, and the fact that there's a two-party system. If you've ever spoken to the people who work within third parties in America, you'll understand how almost impossible it is for them to actually participate in the political process, the electoral process of the United States. So maybe we do have some problems here, but the entire system itself is plagued with various problems. And we're just sort of looking through a microscope at this one particular issue where basically we see one cell of the disease, but we don't actually see the person because we're so close up to it.
So then, Tim, I'm going to put you on the spot for a moment because you're do you think that then a country like Russia, for example, would then see this system, however it's been designed, of American democracy, quote unquote, and say, listen, America is an important global player, and obviously Russia would want to have some sort of good relations with whoever comes into the White House, then why would Russia not also play the same game that everybody else in the world is playing when it comes to American politics?
Well, I don't know why Russia would be any different. I mean, as I've mentioned before, many very large companies, millionaires, billionaires from outside the United States all give large campaign donations. They expect something back in return. Everyone is trying to vie for power within the United States, within Washington. So Russia's just sort of one voice in a huge chorus of people trying to get what they want from Trump and company. So I don't really see Russia as being anything particular unique or interesting. It's just that the Democrats usually and in general use Russia as some sort of excuse because it's something scary and different, and the legacy of the Cold War still rolls on.
On that last point, then, Benjamin, what are your thoughts about Russia and how this is all played out when it comes to the Mueller reports and this entire issue of Russia collusion, which has, dogged Donald Trump for a very long time, and he's still really reeling from that entire issue?
Yeah, I mean, to the extent, almost kind of leading off of what Tim was saying, I think perhaps even we can read a slightly more cynical view of this and saying, is this actually something that Trump has anticipated? He knows that the Democrats are fervently kind of anti-Russia and anti-Trump and Russia's relationship. And is he now pointing this towards even thinking maybe they're now going to start making noises about impeachment? That's something that, looking back to what happened with Bill Clinton, really served him well in many ways. It really tied public support towards him. It backfired on the Republicans. We've started to see already Democrat candidates like Beto O'Rourke, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren saying, you can't say things like this. We're going to have to call for impeachment. And maybe Trump is thinking, this wouldn't do me that much harm. Maybe some calls for impeachment right before election that actually play to my advantage. And perhaps that's maybe one of the other rationales behind why he's made these kind of statements, especially at this time now.
That's an interesting point. Tim, do you agree with that? Because certainly there has already been now talk of impeachment ever since the Mueller report came out, as redacted as it was. But then there was, this obstruction of justice issue is being, the Democrats are using that and running with it, really. And then these statements that Trump keeps coming out with, and we all know Donald Trump says what he feels. Do you think that this will all result in some sort of impeachment process?
ready. But I think the main thing is that if these people who are so outraged by Trump and Russia and some sort of communication between them actually really cared about America, then they should use this as an opportunity to fix all the problems within the electoral process, to really clamp down on lobbying and make sure that American politicians don't have contact with very wealthy, powerful foreign individuals, especially candidates for the post of President of the United States. So it's kind of a shame that all the people who are so outraged have done absolutely nothing and have not proposed any means to prevent any sort of collusion from happening in the future or electoral meddling. I think that that's really the main focus here, and why this is all really just some sort of open-ended conspiracy against Trump and not actual outrage based on something that happened or is happening.
That's the point, isn't it, Benjamin? Because, you would wonder, listen, if you are this concerned about foreign influence in your elections, why not fix that system?
Absolutely, and these are calls that have been happening for decades now. A lot of people have complained for a very long time about the role of economic interest groups in the United States having a disproportionate amount of influence when it comes to presidential campaigning. They can give as much money as they want. They have a far greater bias than individual members of the public. That having been said, there is a strong distinction in the US between the role that companies play, the role that organizations and lobbies play, and the role that foreign governments play in elections. And for a lot of Americans, maybe they're unhappy with the amount of money that corporations get to provide, but that's a world away from the idea that foreign governments can actually come in and provide intelligence. That's something that's far less tolerated within the political system, both amongst politicians themselves, but also amongst the general public. And a lot of them, whilst they're unhappy with the fact that perhaps too much money from where they're not sure it's coming from domestically is flowing around amongst candidates, by and large, they are not happy with the fact that foreign governments can lobby in the same way. So there is a distinction between these two things. I don't think they're all part of the same problem in the US public imagination at all.
That's interesting because, Tim, I threw out the name here, AIPAC and Israel and the Israel lobby, that's been discussed for many, many years as well. Why isn't that being highlighted more? And do you think that it may actually be highlighted as a result of all of this?
I think that the real reason to that is something in people's subconscious. I think there's a very large percent of the population of the United States that has this sort of projection of themselves onto Israel. They see Israel as a sort of a bastion of Westernness in a desert of barbarians. That's not my personal opinion. That's how I think that they see the situation. And so they very much project themselves onto Israel, and so they really want to promote Israel. There's also, for certain forms of Protestantism, a certain religious connection with Israel, but that's a very deep, long conversation. We don't have time for that right now. But there's a reason for that hypocrisy. Russia is different. It is cold. It is scary, whereas Israel is in many ways a little mini United States within the Middle East, in the subcontinent of many, many people in the United States.
Very well. We'll leave there's our final word, but of course we appreciate both your time, insight, and analysis. That was Tim and Benjamin speaking to us there about this important topic, because it's interesting, isn't it, as we spoke about in this conversation, viewers, that Donald Trump is essentially just admitting what probably just happens, really, where foreign governments do provide information, possibly even on political opponents, to be able to have sway over certain candidates, because when that candidate, he or she, comes into office in the White House, will hopefully do their bidding when they are in the White House, when they are president of the U.S., of the world superpower, quote unquote, of course. So has Donald Trump just admitted what the establishment does anyways, and is that why the establishment is angry? And what does this even mean about American democracy? Is it really just up for sale? Is it just whoever pays the most, the highest bidder really just comes out on top and wins? And then why just target Russia? Why not talk about the Israel lobby? Why not talk about other lobbies as well that try to influence the U.S. elections? A lot of questions, of course, open-ended, and we'll consider those questions, of course, in later shows as well here in Scope. I'll leave it there for now, though. I've been Waqar Rizvi. Thanks for watching.